So today I'm going to be presenting on the federal minimum wage and why it should be increased. So today I'm joined with Luke Chapman, Lauren Brandon, and Mary Grace Mitchell. And so federal minimum wage right now is currently at $7.25, which is very low considering how high inflation's gotten, and it hasn't changed in 9 years. And so it's very important that this gets increased because families are struggling a lot, and it's very hard for low-income families. So in order for this to get changed, Congress has to pass a bill, which is then signed by the president. But looking at this from a different perspective, an important agent of change for this issue is Julie Su, and she became acting Secretary of Labor on March 11th, 2023. She was confirmed by the Senate to serve as the Deputy Secretary of Labor on July 13th, 2021. And she taught at UCLA Law School, Northeastern Law School. She's a graduate from Stanford University and Harvard Law School, and began her career with the Skadan Fellowship. So Julie Su is a very knowledgeable person. She's very high up in the Secretary of Labor management in Congress, which is why she's a very important change agent for increasing the federal minimum wage. So yeah. And then, so the first kind of part that I'm going to talk about with this issue is from an article from the Center of American Progress titled "Raising the Minimum Wage Would Be an Investment in the Growing Middle Class." And this describes essentially how the impact that a $15 federal minimum wage would have as opposed to the current minimum wage of $7.25. And just a little background information on the CAP. It's located in Washington, D.C. It's an organization that researches and presents viewpoints on both economic and social issues. It analyzes various studies that suggest a $15 minimum wage would be very beneficial to the American public. And so, according to Rose Qatar, July 24th will mark 14 years since the last time the $7.25 federal minimum wage was raised. Additionally, in 2021, 3 out of 10 adults could not cover a $400 emergency expense, but if a $15 minimum wage was put in place, then the typical worker receiving an $800 increase in the annual wage, with many more likely to be able to meet unanticipated costs. So this is basically just talking about how right now we've got a $7.25 minimum wage, and then which causes low-income families to not be able to afford basic necessities. Whereas if we increase it to $15, then everyone's making the bare minimum to where they can actually support themselves and their families. So, and then moving on, it's important to consider that increasing minimum wage would impact a substantial number of people that are in poverty right now. And this is the primary group that would see substantial benefits. So the Congressional Budget Office did research on this, which was published in an article titled "How Increasing the Federal Minimum Wage Could Affect Employment and Family Income." This essentially describes how boosting the income of low-wage workers with jobs. This basically describes how by boosting the income of low-wage workers, the minimum wage would lift some families out of the poverty level and into closer to the middle class. And since there's such an imbalance between the upper class and the lower class, it would create more of a middle ground. And so yeah, and then moving on. So Cydia O'Nair is a deputy division chief at IMS Financial Department, and she basically studies inflation, basically everything there is to know about inflation. She's very knowledgeable about the topic, and she states that in an inflationary environment, unevenly rising prices is inevitable to reduce purchasing power of some consumers, and this erosion of real income is the single biggest cost of inflation. So as a result of inflation, those making minimum wage are unable to avoid to basically purchase everyday necessities. And so employees working full-time at minimum wage cannot afford basic necessities such as food, housing, transportation, childcare, healthcare in any location across the country. So that's the other thing. It's not just a couple states, it's the federal minimum wage is so low that it impacts all these states. So, and then the final kind of aspect of this is information from an article from Drexel University, which discusses the impact of minimum wage on low-income families as well as low-wage employers. It's credible because the article is based on information from the Center for Hunger-Free Communities, which is a research advocacy center focused on hunger and economic insecurity. And so it states that in 2022, 55.5% of workers were paid at hourly rates, approximately 73.3 million of those, approximately 73.3 million people. And so of those, 247,000 earned exactly the federal minimum wage, and 865,000 received below federal minimum wage. And so this kind of goes off the idea that like there's so many issues in the world right now, and you've got federal minimum wage, which doesn't seem like such a big problem. But then you look at this, that 73.3 million people are experiencing some kind of altercation as a result of federal minimum wage. And so this kind of shows that it's such a important issue that we should be addressing. So in conclusion, it is necessary to advocate for increasing minimum wage because the current federal minimum wage is $7.25, like I've said throughout the presentation, and it's not enough for Americans to support themselves and their families. And increasing the minimum wage would benefit millions of Americans and would help the country as a whole. So yeah, do you guys have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, what's your question?
What has to happen for them to raise the minimum wage and help people who are financially struggling, like in the economy?
It's a good question. So I would say so federal minimum wage is obviously a very hard thing to change, and it's going to take a lot of time, and we're going to have to get people in Congress involved. But as of now, I would say the biggest thing we can do is to help low-income families, because it's going to take time, obviously, for federal minimum wage to be lowered. But if we as a society can start helping the low-income families that are experiencing struggles as a result of the federal minimum wage, I think that would start to benefit the problem and to help us solve the problem and help people who are not making enough to support themselves and their families. So yeah. Thank you guys.
No problem.
You want to show them one more time?